suppose I suppose I could start there. Okay, we're rolling here. Okay, good morning. Today is lesson 23 of a workbook of A Course in Miracles, and I noticed yesterday that some of you found yesterday's lessons to be a little confrontative. If you thought that was, then today you may just run away. Lesson 23, I can escape from the world I see by giving up attack thoughts. And I think for a second I need to read the uncompromising nature of this message here of today's lesson. The idea for today contains the only way out of fear that will ever succeed. The only way out of fear that will ever succeed. Nothing else will work. Everything else is meaningless. But this way cannot fail. Every thought you have makes up some segment of the world you see. It is with your thoughts, then, that we must work if your perception of the world is to be changed. If the cause of the world you see is attack thoughts, you must learn that it is these thoughts which you do not want. There is no point in lamenting the world. There is no point in trying to change the world. It is incapable of change because it is merely an effect. But there is indeed, a point in changing your thoughts about the world. Here, you are changing cause. The effect will change automatically. Again, this goes back to the idea of reversing effect and cause. Many of us have felt in the past that we've been victimized by the world we see and have attempted to go out and change it, only to find that no matter what we try to change, it stays the same. That's because the world is merely an effect of our thinking, and the thinking that we have, our thoughts, is the causation of the world. The world you see is a vengeful world, and everything in it is a symbol of vengeance. Each of your perceptions of external reality is a pictorial representation of your own attack thoughts. One can well ask if this could be called seeing. Is not fantasy a better word for the process, and hallucination a more appropriate term for the results? You see the world you have made, but you do not see yourself as the image maker. You cannot be saved from the world, but you can escape from its cause. This is what salvation means. For where is the world you see when its cause is gone? Vision already holds a replacement for everything you think you see. Loveliness can light your images and so transform them that you will love them, even though they were made of hate, for you will not be making them alone. So, as you see, there's a certain uncompromising nature to this lesson. As he states in the beginning of the course, this is a Course in Miracles. It is a required course. And apparently, one of the things he's saying, much as the quote, man must begin to see himself as both loving and lovable, rather than fearful, with the need to protect and defend ourselves, and the need to get even, vengeful. So you must begin to think of yourself as wholly loving and wholly lovable. Whether you feel that way or not has little to do with it. As a matter of fact, part of the way you would heal your mind is in the recognition that Jesus knows And God is love, and therefore so am I. And the love that God is the totality of reality. It's not a partiality where there's something other. Part of the way you would begin to be able to heal your mind is through the acceptance of that statement, or at least the willingness to allow that statement to be true. So when you begin to have thoughts that are out of alignment with that idea that you're wholly lovable and wholly loving, when you begin to have thoughts that are out of alignment with that idea, you know that those are the thoughts that you need to work with. And today's lesson is much the same. The idea for today contains the only way out of fear that will ever succeed. Nothing else will work. Everything else is meaningless. Now, for many of us who have tried other ways, we've come to the conclusion that in spite of the fact that we may not have given up all of our attack thoughts yet, that this is the only way, because in giving up any one of them and having it change, having our thought change, when we begin to see through the eyes of gratitude and love, when we begin to see, when that vision comes to replace what we previously saw as the cause of our sickness, pain, suffering, and death, and the need to get even, change before our very eyes, as our mind is changed, we understand the truth of these statements. And that's the motivation for continuing along the lines that the workbook has set out. And the practice, which brings the experience, will show us the meaning in the text and give us the understanding we need for the right reasons to continue. I know that there are many people who pick up A Course in Miracles and try to relegate it to just another path. And there's oftentimes lines in the Course that would indicate there are other ways to do it. But I assure you, when he says nothing else will work, everything else is meaningless, he means it. So that's not to say, and don't get me wrong, that's not necessarily to say that everyone will come to study and accept the Course in Miracles, although that may be true. It's not to say that that's what this is attempting to communicate, but what it is attempting to communicate is that anyone who has ever successfully eliminated fear as an obstacle or even a reality or a possibility in their minds and their heart somehow learned that they had to give up the attack thoughts, because the attack thoughts, and you'll understand this as a cause of consternation and, an indication of the split in our mind. The attack thoughts attack the invulnerability of ourself. And because we have given faith to the victimization that the world seems to present to us, the attack thoughts are what we identify with as true and real. And again, there's an idea here in another lesson. He talks about tacit implications. There's a tacit implication here that we all have attack thoughts. Lesson 23, we're still at the beginning of our year. So the tacit indication and what we have to accept is that we still have attack thoughts, and attempting to spiritualize our thinking. And this is a predominant theme in many people's minds. When you're bright enough and your intellect is smart enough, yet you're still being guided by the identification that we all have with the ego. When we read something like this, what we attempt to do is turn the shit into shanola through intellectualization and spiritualization of our thought, rather than, as he says, when vision comes, when this begins to happen, you will see what you didn't make it alone. You're not seeing through lonely, isolated eyes anymore. And that's why this is A Course in Miracles. A miracle is when minds are made one, through the willingness to give up the attack thoughts in situations, and you see experientially that you and your brother not only have no separate interests but are one. And when you join with your brother in the nature of the miraculous, then what you see does begin to change, and that's the healing that takes place. Changed minds, joined, changed minds changes the way we see the world, because it's working at the level of cause rather than attempting to work with the effects as if they're really outside and separate from us. So when he says, for you will not be making them alone, that is the nature of A Course in Miracles. As we join with our brothers, we give up the need to attack our brother because we are one in that moment. And when we are one in that moment, it must affect, as it says, some portion, some segment of the world that you have made in isolation and in the need to defend yourself. It must affect some segment of the world that you see, because the world you see is an effect of your thinking in isolation and separation from everything, not just from God, from your own connectedness within yourself. The idea of separation invades every single idea that we have, every thought that we have. So the attempt to change our mind by spiritualizing our thoughts is not what this is offering. What it's offering is the real ability to open our minds to a correction that allows us to recognize our oneness with our brother and with all the world, as a matter of fact, eventually. And in that miraculous change, in that experiential miraculous change, things really begin to change and healing can take place. Spontaneous remission of disease, rising at the point of death and recognizing there is no death. All of those effects are a result of giving up attack thoughts, because eventually you find out that you're attacking yourself and it's being played out in your world. You're seeking vengeance, but there's only one person you can get vengeance on, it's yourself. Because vengeance and attack is the idea of being alone and isolated. And all that gets affected is the world that you've been looking at. So today's lesson can be very confrontative, and to a certain degree, the confrontation that takes place and the necessity to recognize that it is your thoughts that are making the world, and there's no hope in attempting to change what's outside of you. None whatsoever. Because the thoughts that are making what apparently is outside of you are in your own mind. And you love your thoughts. Make no mistake about it. We all love our thoughts. We love what we made. So the recognition that the way we protect the world and keep it in the static condition that it is because we can continue to love our thoughts in spite of the fact that their thoughts are the ones that are bringing us to sickness, suffering, and pain. Much like God loves his thoughts, which is you. God's thought is love, and you are God's love. God does not change his mind because he knows not of change, being eternal, infinite, whole, and perfect. Somewhere inside of you, you are cut from the same cloth, not out of, but you're cut. Your soul is a piece of that eternal cloth of creation, and you're never going to get out of it. You can't get out of that. It's impossible. So the confrontative nature of today's idea sometimes causes people to run to less practical and totally meaningless disciplines wherein which the thought that I can change the world still exists, because the unwillingness to accept responsibility for the manufacturing of the world we see, from the cause of the manufacturing of the world we see to be the thoughts that we're thinking, um, isn't acceptable. And the truth of the matter is, to many people who think they're loving, they won't accept this idea because they'll refuse to accept that they have thoughts that are not loving, that are in fact vengeful and tactful. And that's, meaningless, because this is telling you that's your world is made. So there's a certain level of acceptance, or at least willingness. And I think it's more helpful to think in terms of willingness when it comes to a lot of these lessons. We don't have to accept them. We don't have to welcome them. We just have to be willing to apply them the way they're given to us to apply. Because in the application is the tacit acceptance, and in the willingness to apply them as they're given is the willingness to let go of our own way of thinking for another. And in that, we do join with the Christ mind of Jesus. And in that, we do and are able to allow our minds to be changed. But if you spiritualize your thought through the process of intellectualization and deny yourself the ability to recognize salvation in a lesson like this, then you withhold yourself from the process of change that, quite frankly, he says is the only way it'll work. The idea for today contains the only way out of fear that will ever succeed. Nothing else will work. Everything else is meaningless. There is no point in lamenting the world. There is no point in attempting to change the world. It is incapable of change because it is an effect. It is not cause. Now, obviously, we all have lamented the world, but we no longer have to. We no longer have to waste our time meaninglessly lamenting the world, when in fact we can accept the lamentations that have already taken place, the inability to do anything about it, and the recognition that maybe perhaps if we apply the lesson for today, it will benefit us and therefore all the world, which is merely an effect of our thinking. So let this confront you. As I'm saying, let this give rise to the thoughts in your mind that you feel are in opposition to the lesson, and work with those thoughts rather than attempting to change the world, because it will not work without you changing your mind.